Closing keynote. A call to action. Image, a black and white drawing of a comic book with different features labeled, dialogue, description, sound effects, panel number, music notes. Closing keynote speaker. Chancey Fleet.
So we are turning to our very final presentation of the day with Chancey. We really appreciate Chancey wrapping up our day from the Dominican Republic on vacation. So thank you very much, Chancey. Take it away.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here. Can everybody hear me and see me okay?
We can. Thank you.
Okay, fantastic. So hi, everybody. My name is Chancey Fleet. I'm the Assistive Technology Coordinator at New York Public Library, Andrew Haskell Braille and Talking Book Library, a very small branch with a very big name. And I'm so happy to be here. Visual description, I don't know, I have long, dirty blonde hair. I'm in my late 30s. I'm wearing a crane origami necklace and a flowered dress and sitting in the Dominican Republic, but all you can see is the universal wall behind me. So it's a pleasure to join such a diverse group of blind people and sighted allies from all sectors of the industry. So I think that the growing movement to make comics accessible to blind people, in addition to the inevitable questions of modality and technique and distribution that we've discussed today, I think one challenge is likely to be grappling with the fundamental question that has also challenged comics themselves as a medium, which is, how is this work necessary and valuable enough to compel our time and resources? As we take what we've learned today out into the broader world beyond this Zoom and into our diverse disciplines, whether we're content creators, strategists, and artists of adaptation, advocates, educators, enthusiasts, we have to be ready for this question to come up in our conversations, or I think more often to lurk just below the surface of conversations we're having, when stakeholders and potential fellow travelers that we want to have along on this journey are weighing whether the goal of accessible comics in fact deserves the commitment of resources, time, and creative energy in a world that has those things in finite measure. After today, I think we all know that comics are valuable. We've heard and experienced through the presentations of our colleagues and clips of their work that accessible comics do have the potential to be as diverse and impactful as comics as a medium. Audio description and dramatization can, of course, be used to bring two-dimensional stories to life while preserving the intentions, stylistic choices, and narrative structure of original comic artists. An adapted comic translates visual storytelling into description that's rich enough to draw a scene while concise enough to propel a narrative and preserving a granular frame-by-frame story progression. The existence and success of blind content creators, in particular like Chad Allen, shows us that even audio-driven comics that were conceived and written to be accessible first, rather than visual first, are still recognizable as belonging to and benefiting from the unique tropes and conventions of the comic medium. Meanwhile, 2D and 2.5D approaches to comics accessibility have the power to capture the spatial dynamics of comic frames. Tactile artist Anne Cunningham mentioned earlier today that tactile drawing seems to lend itself naturally to this medium, and I agree with that sentiment. The boldness, sparse imagery, simplified forms, and iconic symbols, the dramatic scaling of many comics, not all but many, lend themselves to tactile representation that is eminently achievable, authentic, and aesthetically satisfying and meaningful. Perhaps the richest potential of accessible comics involves combining tactile, audio, and even haptic media into an immersive or evocative experience that gathers strength from each, from the richness of storytelling with audible narrative and sound, the spatial and tangible precision of tactile presentation, and the interactive power of haptics. There's so much more that we can discover about making comics accessible, but today we've already discovered a rich array of approaches for accessible comics. So one reason why accessible comics are important is that we know now that access is robustly, demonstrably, joyfully achievable. Moving beyond the reflexive assertion that access is a right, though, why do blind people need comics? Well, we've long established that we have the right to access textual material. But the fact is, we don't live, nor is our culture evolving in the context of a text-only world. Missing out on comics, I would argue, leaves gaps in our understanding and inclusion as surely as would going without movies or music or theater or dance. The comic medium offers some unique superpowers that we should all get to experience. Frame-by-frame depictions are great, for example, for explaining conceptual progressions in science, mathematics, history, and almost any other educational endeavor. For example, much of what I've learned about the medium comes from this book that Scott McCloud wrote called Understanding Comics, which is a comic about comics, and it's an educational text. And it works so well because of the medium's incredible ability to break down really complex ideas and trajectories into a series of observable moments that one can encounter and interrogate at one's own pace, and to revisit and reinforce moments of understanding throughout a narrative arc by coming back to frames and coming back to what we would call visual touch points or spatial touch points. If you've ever been a blind child or adult, or if you've ever been one of our educators or family members, it should be clear to you by now that this medium is also capable of reinforcing and strengthening our spatial literacy skills and our curiosity around spatial literacy in a way that feels sometimes a little mysterious, novel, but very motivating and very satisfying. The comic medium also gives life to the personal stories in a diverse genre of graphic memoirs, often from underrepresented and marginalized groups. For example, Alison Bechdel's queer coming of age in Fun Home, or a young John Lewis's call to becoming a civil rights leader in his graphic novel, The March, which is available on Bard, by the way, highly recommend. Graphic memoir invites the reader to focus on pivotal moments of discovery, decision, suspense, loss, triumph, all those strong emotion-filled moments, and to experience those moments in a visceral way, to really notice the details, to focus, to be there before moving on. Between the frames in graphic memoir, graphic novels, and a lot of comics, in what graphic artists call the gutter and the rest of us call white space, readers are invited to imagine, infer, and wonder about what goes on from one depicted moment to the next. And that quality of inference and quality of filling in the gutter, filling in what happens between the frames, offers a style of engagement, a feeling of engagement that I think is unique, that we all deserve to experience. The power of accessible comics is so compelling that it's already changing how sighted people experience the medium. Neil Gaiman's classic Sandman series, first volume, was released by Audible in July 2020 to high acclaim. The audio version of this epic fantasy maintains fidelity to the original while embracing a new medium. There's an audio scene for each frame. There's rich description for each new character and each new setting. Sometimes setting is kind of a character in the way that it gets described. Sound effects are vivid, but they're stylized. And dialogue is sparing enough and intense enough when it does occur to carry the narrative weight that we would expect of a speech balloon. The remainder of the Sandman series is now in production. It's very successful. And I know it absorbed me. And by the way, shameless plug, it's also on Bard. Go check it out. If one of the best loved graphic novels of the late 20th century can find a welcome from fans of the original and from new audiences who didn't necessarily think that they were interested in graphic novels, what can't accessible comics do? This was unintentionally, but it was an accessible comic. Access to comics means access to education, to culture, to the intensity and power of sequential storytelling, and to a more creative, engaged, and joyful way of spatial cognition and expression. Gathering together today has been a vital step towards working together, towards sharing one another's individual frames of reference, our creative processes as we approach original work or adaptation, our insights as educators and practitioners, and our perceptions as readers. Continuing to share what we know in this small but dynamic and growing field is vital. Sharing our perspectives and perceptions will enrich everyone's work. More importantly, though, we need to rely on each other to amplify the work being done in this field and to make it more discoverable. At this moment, when you're feeling full of ideas, inspired, and perhaps even a little overwhelmed, I think it's still safe to say that most blind children have never read a comic. Most blind adults wouldn't know where or how to access a graphic novel of interest. Most educators couldn't tell you exactly why comics that show up in a classroom need to be transcribed. Some of them might even tell you that those are just eye candy. I know that every person in this Zoom represents a reason to be hopeful about the future of accessible comics. A motivated person equipped with essential knowledge and dedicated to spreading the word. We know that we can create, demand, and normalize access to comics because our community has done that same thing for text, for the web, for the mobile web, for museums, for so many things. And we know what we need to shape a more accessible future for comics. We need an informed conviction that the medium matters and that we can talk about that to stakeholders. We need a working knowledge of how meaningful, satisfying, scalable access can happen and what access techniques are suitable for what different types of comics and situations. And more than anything, we need each other to stay in touch and also to amplify what we discovered today so much that every blind adult and child, every educator, every parent, every ally, every publisher knows that comics are for everyone and knows exactly what is possible. Thank you.
Wow. Thank you so much, Chancey. We asked you to deliver closing notes that would serve as a call to action, and you definitely did that. And on that note, with your mention of bringing this community together and calling a whole community to action, or rather communities to action, I want to remind people that, for ongoing discussions, if there are certain projects that people feel especially fired about and want to connect as a working group, we have a Facebook group. It is facebook.com/groups/comics A11Y. And that link is there again in our chat. And before I hand it over to Nick for our sort of next steps, where do we go from here? I just wanted to give a huge, huge thanks to interpreter Carson, who is interpreting now, interpreter Annie, and captioner Lisa. Thank you all for ensuring we have a fully accessible experience today. We really could not have done this without you. And thank you, Longmore Institute on Disability, for supporting these accessibility services. And now on to you, Nick, for where do we go next?
Wow, thanks, Ting. That was awesome. It's a little hard to have to follow up any of that. And Chancey, yeah, that you really brought it to a tremendous call to action, which is what we were hoping for. I'm going to be very brief here. I want to say lots of thank yous to my colleagues, to all the people who made this event possible, and all of the moderators. The moderators, you were fantastic, and our panelists were fantastic. So it's just great. And trying to keep up with all the people's comments and resources, I couldn't, but I'm excited to learn more about them. And as I opened today with saying, you know, this just occurred to me that this was something that I should know more about, and I should deal more with in my work and in my teaching. And so it's kind of astounding to me to see this conversation grow, and how much enthusiasm and how much needed enthusiasm is around this. So I'll just say, after the first event back in March, I was so excited about it. I was bursting with ideas, and tried to explain it to my then 6-year-old daughter, 7 now, at dinner, what we'd done. And as I was trying to explain it to her, I was struck by something that Josh had said in that panel, in that day, about not one size fitting all, and that's come up throughout the day again today. You know, that there was whatever the different modalities work for different people, and even within the same modality, even you know, two different types of approaches to audio description met different people's needs. And in thinking about that, I started thinking about the idea of a charrette. So something where we either get an existing comic or a comic created for this purpose, and somehow convene a bunch of teams interested to explore in different modalities and different approaches, and try to make you know, this wide range of adaptations, and then at some point bring everybody together to test them out and touch them. And as I think was pointed out in the tactile panel, you know, seeing this over Zoom, or listening to it over Zoom, really doesn't give you a full sense of the experience. So when we're able to be in person again, that we have a real proper event, that people can hold these objects, touch these, listen to them, and experience them the way that they're meant to be happening. So how do we get to that, to trying that out? That's a tougher one. We need resources and partners, and that's why we're here today, is to have these conversations, to learn a lot, as Chancey said, to bring this call to action, and try to generate more awareness. And so we're really excited to keep this conversation going. The partnerships that have been created, through the chat already and through the Facebook group, and people have been reaching out to me and others. So we're excited to keep this conversation going. We'd really like to continue it with this sort of dream idea of a charrette. So if that resonates with you and you say, oh, I want to be part of that, or I know how to support that, please reach out to us. And I would really like to see the awareness around this help the industry become more aware of where it needs to go, and to bring more people into appreciating comics and what comics can do. And Anil, I really appreciated what you said, and at the start of yours, that you hadn't thought a lot about comics or something to that effect, and that this is sort of sliding you back into involvement. So I think we want to bring people into comics, people who wanted to be into comics, and maybe people who didn't know they could be. And at the same time, we want to make comics available to just everyone. So I'm just really overwhelmed and grateful to everyone who participated, and excited to see us continuing this conversation going forward. So I'll say thank you. And Emily and Ting, if you want to jump in just to say anything, I think that's that.
No last words from me other than thank you all.
No, I would give lots of hugs, but here we are. Thank you.
Thanks for hanging out today, everybody.